Have you ever stopped to think about why we argue so much? Nietzsche suggested that the obsession with debate might be the biggest sign of weakness there is. Shocking, isn't it? After all, we live in a world where arguing seems to be the peak of intelligence, but what if it's just a facade, a mask for insecurity disguised as rationality? Think about the last time you got into an argument. Maybe it was to prove a point or defend something you believed in. In the end, was it worth it? Or was it like shouting into the wind, hoping it would change direction? Nietzsche challenges us to strip away appearances and face a provocative question. Is true strength found in debate or in those who don't need it? Today, let's deconstruct the logic that underpins both modern society and our personal struggles. It won't be comfortable, but it might just be eye-opening. Socrates believed reason was the lamp that illuminated the darkness of ignorance. To him, living without examining one's life was like navigating without a compass, lost in a sea of uncertainties. It's a powerful idea, but also a dangerous one. By placing reason at the center of everything, he left us a complex legacy. The compulsion to justify even what doesn't need justification. Think about something simple, like making a decision based on instinct. Have you ever liked someone and just known deep down that you didn't need a reason? But then reason shows up like an uninvited guest, asking, "Why do you like this person? Are they the right choice?" The same happens with work decisions or moments of risk. Sometimes a business person feels they should invest in something even without all the numbers in hand. They trust what they feel, not what they can prove. For Socrates, this would almost be a sin. Reason, when used wisely, is like a sharp knife. It cuts through confusion, separating truths from lies. But it can also wound us. Imagine someone who overanalyzes every little detail before acting, a prisoner of their own doubts. Simple decisions turn into a labyrinth of justifications. What was meant to be a tool becomes a burden. Pascal once said, "The heart has its reasons, which reason does not know." He reminds us that not everything important can be explained. Intuition, feelings, what we call instinct, these play a vital role in life. Yet we live in such a Socratic society that when we can't explain something, we feel lost, or worse, guilty. Socrates gave us a way of thinking, but has it also become a tyrant over our actions? How many times have you held back from doing something because you couldn't justify it? Do we really need to justify everything? Ancient cultures, like hunter-gatherer tribes, didn't have the luxury of spending hours debating what to do. If instinct said to run, hunt, or fight, that's what they did. For them, survival was in the hands of the body and impulse, not the mind and doubt. Today, this might seem primitive, but are we really so different? Consider a soccer player making a split-second decision. He doesn't calculate angles or analyze every possibility. He feels a quick touch, a precise shot, and the goal happens. Not because he thought about it, but because he trusted what his body knew how to do. Just like a wild animal doesn't justify its strength, it simply acts. Nietzsche saw this as a fundamental truth. To him, a lion doesn't ask itself whether it should hunt. It doesn't write treatises on morality or seek the approval of its peers. It just is. This strength, born from instinct, is natural and perhaps even superior to logic. In contrast, we live in an age where everything demands an explanation. We act as though the value of our actions depends on the validation of others or some invisible rule. But what if some of our best decisions come from what we can't explain? Think back to a time when you felt the right path to take. Maybe during a job interview, in a relationship, or even in a moment of danger. Instinct spoke louder, and you acted before you thought, and it worked out. Not everything that matters can be explained, and not everything explained matters. This phrase captures the dilemma well. In our quest to justify every step, we lose touch with something more visceral, more pure, our intuition. The power of instinct doesn't ask for permission, It simply exists, ready to be used. The real question is, are we ready to trust what we feel without the need to justify every choice? Some people believe debate is a way to showcase intelligence and strength, but Nietzsche saw it differently. For him, debate was often the weapon of the resentful, a way to compensate for a lack of power with sharp words used not to build, but to attack. Look around you. Social media is the perfect example. How often do you see endless arguments about politics, morality, or even trivial topics? And how many of those discussions actually change anything? Most of the time, it's just people trying to win through logic because deep down, they lack another way to assert themselves. Resentment reveals itself in these moments as an invisible fuel. The frustration of lacking the power to act turns into a desire to convince, to attack, to be heard. Nietzsche called this the morality of slaves. He noticed a pattern in the actions of the weaker. Instead of confronting what oppresses them directly, they create values and narratives to justify their position. It's like a bird trapped in a cage, trying to open the door with its beak, not out of malice, but out of desperation. And debate in these cases becomes the cage itself. This doesn't mean that debate is always bad, but it's worth asking, why are we debating? Is it to exchange ideas or to reaffirm our place in the world? Think about that online argument you stuck with for hours, knowing from the start that no one would change their mind. Was it worth it? Or was it like walking in circles, exhausting yourself without ever getting anywhere? The truth is, when we obsessively argue, we're not just defending ideas, we're trying to fill the void left by a lack of action. And this is the question Nietzsche forces us to face. Do we argue because we believe or because we can't act? Philosophy is often seen as the peak of wisdom, but Nietzsche, with his critical lens, presents us with an uncomfortable challenge. Does excessive questioning bring us closer to the truth, or does it paralyze us? To him, the pursuit of external justifications can become a prison, a symptom of weakness, not strength. Consider the modern phenomenon of overthinking. It's when you analyze a situation so much that instead of gaining clarity, you become even more confused and paralyzed. How many times have you delayed an important decision because you were trying to predict every possible outcome? It's like trying to cross a river, but spending so much time studying the currents that by the time you finally jump, the opportunity is gone. Nietzsche saw something similar in philosophy. Excessive reflection can create a kind of paralysis where thinking becomes more important than acting. Procrastination is a practical example of this. You have an important task, but instead of starting, you spend hours crafting the perfect plan, searching for the best approach or waiting for the ideal moment. In the end, nothing happens while you think the world around you keeps moving. Schopenhauer, whom Nietzsche admired and critiqued, offers an interesting counterpoint. For Schopenhauer, the will was the driving force of life, but also the source of all suffering. The difference is that Nietzsche rejected resignation. He believed in action, in overcoming endless questioning. While you're wondering if you should act, the world has already changed. This phrase captures the urgency of his critique. This doesn't mean Nietzsche dismissed philosophical thought. On the contrary, he saw value in reflection, but only when it led to real transformation. For him, wisdom should be a tool, not an excuse to avoid life. So what does this mean for us? Perhaps it's time to ask, are we thinking to live or living to think? Because in the end, the philosophy that matters is the one that pushes us forward, not the one that keeps us stuck in inertia. The Übermensch, or Overman, is one of Nietzsche's most challenging concepts. It's not just a figure of physical strength, but someone who transcends the limitations imposed by inherited values. The Übermensch doesn't seek external justifications. He creates his own values and lives with a confidence that comes from within. Picture a tree growing alone in a vast field. It has no shade to protect it, but it also has no competitors for its light. Its roots grow deep because it relies solely on itself. This is the essence of the Übermensch, being self-sufficient and finding strength in one's instinct without needing validation or support. Today, the Übermensch appears in many forms. Think of entrepreneurs who create groundbreaking businesses or artists who take bold risks with unconventional work. These individuals challenge the status quo and aren't afraid to fail because their actions don't depend on anyone's approval. They represent a return to instinctive confidence, a strength that can't be explained but is deeply felt. However, living as an Übermensch isn't easy. It takes courage to abandon the values we inherit from society, traditions, or even the people who raised us. It's always easier to follow a well-trodden path than to carve out new ones. Nietzsche's question remains: are we willing to face this creative solitude? The Übermensch, therefore, is a metaphor for humanity's potential to live beyond conventions. He doesn't ask if he's right or wrong, he decides. The compass guiding him is one he creates himself, pointing to a direction only he understands. But in today's world, can we truly free ourselves from the need to justify our actions and create our own values? Or are we still seeking approval? In everything we do, philosophy, at its core, should help us understand the world. Yet at some point, it began dictating rules on how to live. Nietzsche believed this shift occurred when abstract ideas were turned into universal truths, locking natural instincts into rigid ethical dilemmas. The result? A morality that makes us doubt even what should be simplest, acting in alignment with our nature. Think about an impulsive decision that turned out to be the best choice. Maybe you accepted an unexpected invitation that changed your life or made a quick decision during a crisis. Despite the positive outcome, how often did you feel a pang of guilt or ask yourself, was that the right thing to do? That's where modern morality, shaped by philosophy, becomes a burden. It teaches us to distrust our instincts, treating them as something to be corrected rather than relied upon. Nietzsche saw Christianity as one of the primary drivers of this transformation. By elevating sacrifice and the denial of desires, he believed Christian morality shaped a worldview where even the most spontaneous actions needed justification. Eating, loving, fighting, deciding. Everything became subject to analysis under the lens of a correct moral code. But has this made us happier or just more insecure? Consider how modern ethical dilemmas affect us. We feel guilty for spending money on things that bring us joy, for saying no to something we don't want, or even for prioritizing ourselves in situations that demand sacrifice. It's as if natural, instinctive life has been hijacked by an invisible tribunal that evaluates our every move. Modern morality makes us doubt what should come naturally. This phrase sums up Nietzsche's critique. Instead of living as we are, we create versions of ourselves that fit external standards. But what do we truly gain from this? Perhaps it's time to ask, are we living according to our instincts or just following the rules we were taught? The idea of justice is often presented as something noble, universal, and impartial, but Nietzsche saw it differently. For him, justice is often just a creation of the powerful to maintain control or the weak to limit those who are strong. It's rarely neutral. The famous Melian dialogue described by Thucydides illustrates this idea well. During the war between Athens and Sparta, the Athenians confronted the small island of Melos, demanding its submission. The people of Melos appealed to justice, but the Athenians were blunt. The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. This phrase reveals an uncomfortable truth. In practice, justice is often dictated by those with power. Now bring this into the present. Think about decisions made by major powers in international conflicts. Who defines what's just in armed disputes or economic disagreements? Most often it's those with the greatest military power or political influence. In such cases, justice is shaped by the interests of those who have the strength to enforce their will. But we don't need to look so far. Take a closer look at everyday situations. Have you noticed how, in common arguments, justice is often an excuse to impose one's worldview? Someone might argue they're seeking what's right, but in reality, they're just defending what benefits them most. Justice, in this case, becomes a tool to mask more selfish intentions. Nietzsche challenges us to ask, is justice really a universal idea, or are we always bound by a morality created by those in power? Furthermore, to what extent are we willing to accept this morality as inevitable? We live in an era where nearly everything is up for debate. Social media, forums, and panel discussions give us endless opportunities to share opinions, questions, ideas, and defend positions. At first glance, this seems like intellectual progress. But Nietzsche might disagree. For him, this excess of words might be more a sign of cultural decline than strength. Think about the polarized debates you see every day on Twitter or other platforms. They often begin with lofty goals, resolving important issues, seeking justice, defending values. But what's left in the end? Heated comments, bruised egos, and almost no practical solutions. It's like a fire consuming all the wood around it, but producing little light to illuminate the way forward. Nietzsche saw constant debate as a form of distraction. To him, a society obsessed with discussions wastes its energy on empty words instead of channeling it into action. This is what he referred to as resentment, attacking verbally because of an inability to transform the world in concrete ways. This isn't to say that debate has no value, but there's a difference between debating to create something new and debating merely to reaffirm what we already think. The problem is that too often we argue more to feel relevant than to truly change anything. So the question arises, are we debating because we are intellectually strong, or are we trying to fill a void? Nietzsche challenges us to look in the mirror and ask whether all this excess of dialogue is in fact a way of avoiding the responsibility to act. After all, what's the point of a philosophy that never leaves the page? For Nietzsche, living beyond good and evil didn't mean denying the concepts of right and wrong, but rejecting the need to seek external validation for our choices. He saw traditional morality as a constraint, something that kept humanity tethered to justifications that were often more convenient for society than for the individual. Think about how even small decisions are judged by external standards. Buying something expensive for yourself might be labeled selfish. Prioritizing your own time over accepting an invitation might seem insensitive. Nietzsche proposed the opposite, a life guided by inner strength, where we don't need permission to be who we are. This ethos manifests in actions that prioritize authenticity over acceptance. Picture someone who decides to radically change their career because they feel they're on the wrong path. Despite judgmental looks or advice to stick with stability, they move forward. It's a choice that doesn't require justifications for others, only for themselves. Nietzsche challenges us to abandon the need to explain every step we take. The ethics he suggests are like a path shaped by one's own strength and conviction, not by what others expect. He believed true freedom lies in breaking free from this dependence on approval and creating a code that's genuinely our own. So the challenge is simple and direct. Who decides what is good and what is bad in your life? That is the essence of an ethics without justification. Nietzsche's invitation for us to take control of our choices without bowing to external expectations is clear. He didn't reject reason, but neither did he elevate it as supreme. For him, true strength lay in overcoming the tyranny of logic without discarding it, finding a balance between rational clarity and instinctive power. This balance is what allows us to act with courage and authenticity without being paralyzed by doubt or driven by blind impulses. Imagine someone walking a tightrope. Instinct keeps them moving, while reason helps them adjust their balance with each step. rely too much on logic, and they stop and fall. Rely only on impulse, and they lose control. Life works similarly. We need both reason and instinct, but in the right measure. Consider an entrepreneur starting a business. Instinct drives them, makes them believe in their vision, even without guarantees. But reason helps them plan, set goals, and avoid unnecessary risks. Without instinct, they might never begin. Without reason, they would likely fail. This integration is what Nietzsche envisioned as the transcendence of life, not denying it, but putting it in service of a fuller life.